Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So I am back today because the 20th of May actually constitutes my 5th anniversary of making videos on BookTube, which I absolutely cannot believe. I can't believe it has been 5 years that I have been making videos. I remember a few years back, Jen Campbell actually did a video where she went through 5 years of her best books of the year since she'd started making BookTube videos. Talked about each of them, but then picked out the best of those books. I remember thinking, oh yeah, when I get to 5 years on BookTube, that's what I want to do. And then somehow, as I was ordering all of these books together, I found it actually quite easy to make a ranking list. So in fact, that's what I'm going to do. I have done a complete ranking of all 45 books which have appeared in my 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 and 2024 Best Books of the Year videos, going from bottom to top. There are some instances where books by the same author, which I think of quite similarly, I've ended up putting on the same ranking. So in fact, there are only 42 rankings here rather than 45. And a note that just because something has made it 42nd on the list does not mean that it is a bad book by any means. As I say, these are all books that featured in my best books of their respective years. But obviously there are definitely some favourite books that you like more than others. Some which just have meant a little bit more to me that I bring up again and again on my channel, have just wormed their way into my heart that little bit more. So without much further ado, since this is going to be quite a long video, let's just get straight into these 42 rankings. Coming in at spot number 42 is Clarice Bean, Think Like an Elf by Lauren Child. This was a lovely return to a series that I loved as a child. Not only was it a new book in a series that I loved as a child, but it was also a Christmas installment, so, you know, ticking a lot of boxes for me. In this, our main character of Clarice Bean is trying to save her family's Christmas when everything seems to be going wrong, trying to get people into the festive spirit. Always a recipe for a book that I'm going to love. Spot number 41 goes to Ask a Historian by Greg Jenner, in which public historian Greg Jenner answers various questions that the public have put to him about history, about historians, various questions about historical events, historical people, how history is recorded, and he does it with his trademark humour and wit. Spot number 40 goes to British by Afua Hirsch, part memoir, part social commentary on race, class and identity, and never feeling like you truly belong. Spot number 39 goes to Bargain Bin Romcom by Lena Norms. This is a really funny, witty poetry collection which celebrates life's awkward moments. Spot number 38 goes to The Day the World Came to Town by Jim DeFede. As a big Come From Away fan, you know that I loved this book, looking at the experiences of the people of Gander, who ended up taking 38 planes worth of people into their homes following the 9/11 attacks when US airspace was closed. It's a really poignant history about kindness and compassion in the face of a horrific event. Spot number 37 goes to Love After Love by Ingrid Persaud, which is a really moving, often quite dark novel about chosen family, difficult family relationships, keeping secrets from each other. It also has some of the most beautiful, vivid descriptions of food writing that I've ever read. Spot number 36 goes to Blue Stockings by Susanna Gibson, a wonderful group biography looking at the 18th century women writers, painters, philosophers who all came together to host these literary salons and prove that an intellectual woman was not a monstrous thing. These women would end up inspiring figures like Jane Austen, Mary Wollstonecraft, and really reshape how we thought about intellectual women. Spot number 35 goes to Unwell Women by Elinor Cleghorn, a very sweeping history about women's health, how women's health and women's pain has been misunderstood and mistreated by medical practitioners from the ancient world through to now. An infuriating history, but one definitely worth a read. Spot 34 goes to Dear Reader by Cathy Rentzenbrink. This is such a wonderful, heartfelt memoir about the power of reading, the various books that have gotten our author through hard times, and just the comfort and joy that books can bring. Spot 33 goes to You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry, a friends to lovers romance story, alternating timelines, but ultimately two former friends come back together to go on one last vacation away with each other and hoping to resolve a conflict from 2 years prior, but maybe the conflict is that there is something more between them than just friends. Spot 32 goes to My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, an absolutely haunting novel in which a young woman is forced to confront the realities of a relationship that she had with her teacher many years ago and how it was potentially not as consensual as she envisioned it to be. Spot number 31 goes to The Secrets of Hartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden, a love letter to the Brontes, a gothic mystery in which a governess unravels the secrets of her new home but is also keeping secrets of her own. Spot number 30 goes to Love and Fury by Samantha Silva, a really lovely fictional fictionalisation of the life of Mary Wollstonecraft, as told by Mary Wollstonecraft to her daughter, who she is preparing to give birth to. Spot number 29 goes to The Language of Food by Annabel Abbs, focusing in on the life of poet and cookery writer Eliza Acton as she prepares to write a very in-depth English cookbook that she is hoping is going to appeal to a mass audience. It looks particularly at her friendship with a maid who would end up aiding Eliza on her way to writing this cookbook. It gives us a lot of insight into class, into gender, women striving to make a name for themselves in Victorian England. Spot number 28 is our first double feature, and it is two poetry collections, Somebody Give This Heart a Pen and Wearing My Mother's Heart by Sophia Thakur. I love Sophia Thakur's poetry. She's one of those poets who just really inspires me to want to write poetry myself, even though I really have no business doing so. Her poems look at identity, about love, about family relationships, and I just find so wonderful to read. Spot number 27 goes to A Lady's Guide to Scandal by Sophie Irwin, a really fantastic spin on the persuasion story, which sees our protagonist getting out from under the feet of the family that she married into, finding freedom in her widowhood, and being drawn to two men, one whom she had rejected in her past, persuaded to marry a richer man, and another controversial, enigmatic figure who really tests everything that she thinks she knows about herself. Spot number 26 goes to The King's Mother by Annie Garthwaite. This is her second book looking at Cecily Neville, looking at her life after her son Edward came to the throne, up through to the end of her death, so covering the last half of the Wars of the Roses, the reign and death of Edward IV, the usurping of the throne by her son Richard, who would end up being Richard III. It talks about the princes in the Tower, the Battle of Bosworth, and the rise of the Tudor line. It's such a wonderful, balanced portrayal of all of these figures. Spot number 25 goes to Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. This lovely coming-of-age story set in 19th century England, looking at the main character of Molly Gibson, navigating her young adult life when her father remarries, the ways in which Molly is often overlooked, and struggles to find appreciation and love. To me, there are a lot of similarities between this and Mansfield Park, and as much as I do love Jane Austen, I do think that this is a slightly more enhanced version of Mansfield Park in a lot of different ways. Spot number 24 goes to Uproar by Alice Loxton, a wonderful, lively, very accessible history of the different satirists, caricaturists of the late 18th, early 19th century. We're talking about James Gilray, Thomas Rowlandson, Isaac Cruikshank, who would depict political and social satirical prints and drew out the humour and the comedy of a lot of social and political events of their time period. Spot number 23 goes to Unequal Affections by Laura S. Arminston, a retelling of Pride and Prejudice in which the first time that Mr. Darcy proposes to Elizabeth actually takes time to consider his proposal, and this time does not refuse him. Despite the fact that she had all of the same issues with him, on all of the same complaints, she reflects and realises that she can't really afford to say no to Mr. Darcy, and we are left wondering as the reader how these two ever come to really truly fall in love when Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth do not have their big blow-up argument that they have in the original novel. You have to read the book to find out, but it is a really interesting thought experiment. Spot number 22 goes to Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn, the fourth book in the Bridgerton series, which looks at the relationship, the romance between Colin Bridgerton and Penelope Featherington. As much as I do love season 3 of the show, if you've only ever seen the show, I am here to say that the book is actually better. I really enjoy how Colin and Penelope communicate their differences. I think they display in a lot of ways some really healthy communication when it comes to disagreements. I'm really struck by it every time that I read this book. Spot number 21, it goes to The Radium Girls by Kate Moore, a heartbreaking, infuriating true story of the young women who ended up suffering radiation poisoning during their time working in factories in the early 20th century, using radium paint to paint the dials of watches. This depicts their fight for justice when the companies that they work for turn around and say that they are not going to compensate them for the pain that they've suffered. Spot number 20 goes to The Good Wife of Bath by Karen Brooks, a feminist reimagining of Chaucer's Wife of Bath, imagining her as a real person who Chaucer knew and interacted with, giving her the spotlight and the chance to tell what actually happened to her, and her dismay when she finds out that her life has been turned into a scandalous, salacious story by Chaucer. It's so worth reading just for the depiction of the Wife of Bath, who is just so dynamic and such a forceful character. You can completely understand why people flock to her. Spot number 19 goes to A Curious History of Sex by Kate Lister, a really fantastic primer if you are interested in the history of sex and sexuality, one that I point so many people to. It goes through a lot of different topics, yes, but I think is just such a great introduction. Spot number 18 goes to In Memoriam by Alice Wynne, probably my favourite fictionalisation of World War I, looking at two young men, Sidney Elwood and Henry Gaunt, who are secretly in love with the other, and the harrowing experiences that they have living and fighting in the trenches trenches of World War I. It's a very brutal depiction, as you might expect, but definitely worth a read. Spot number 17 goes to The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hurst by Katie Lumsden. Just this fantastic little slice of life, looking at this society in the fictional county of Wickenshire, who are rocked to discover that one of their most eligible bachelors has gotten married to a widow with children, and they gossip and they speculate why this could have been. The atmosphere of this, the way that Katie writes her characters, is just so very wonderful. You feel like you were plopped on an armchair listening in on all of these people. There are so many lovely twists and surprises along the way. It's a real love letter to Jane Austen and Elizabeth Gaskell, and just such a wonderful read. On a similar non-fiction tract, for spot 16, we have Love and Marriage in the Age of Jane Austen by Rory Muir, looking at the various stages of courtship, love and marriage in the Regency and late Georgian period, the kind of marriages that would have inspired Jane Austen. This is so meticulously researched, really, really informative. I think anybody who is wanting to write about this time period needs to read this book. Spot 15 goes to The Only Plane in the Sky by Garrett M. Graff, an oral history of 9/11, which is incredibly harrowing, but very vital, important read. I especially recommend listening to the audio of this, as you really get to experience this patchwork quilt of oral stories of various people's different experiences of the day. Spot number 14 goes to The Instrumentalist by Harriet Constable, looking at the story of violin prodigy Anna Maria, who is tutored by Antonio Vivaldi. But as the years go by, as she gets older, as competition becomes more fierce, finds the atmosphere that she is in very stifling, very restrictive, and is shocked to discover that Vivaldi is actually using her compositions and passing them off for his own. Spot number 13, I'm Giving to Foster by Claire Keegan, a wonderful novella set in rural Ireland in the 1980s, in which a young girl is looked after by a couple when her parents end up having to send her away for the summer. And we see as this young unnamed girl is experiencing real love and compassion from parental figures for the first time. It is so heartfelt, so devastating. I am still kind of baffled at how Claire Keegan is able to pack so much characterization in such a short book. Spot number 12 goes to Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo. In this, we meet the very funny, very witty Barrington Walker, originally from the Caribbean, but who emigrated to the UK with the Windrush generation. He is also secretly a closeted gay man, and in his 70s is having to come to terms with the fact that he has not been living his true, authentic life, and is he now in his 70s brave enough to actually come forward to his family and reveal his true self. This is just one of the best point of view characters that I've ever read. Barry is definitely a flawed character, but he is so funny, so intelligent, so insightful. He's a delight to read about, even though sometimes you do just want to shake him. Spot number 11 is the second of my dual rankings, and it is Elizabeth of York, The Last White Rose, and Jane Seymour, The Haunted Queen, both by Alison Weir. I'm putting these two together because they are very, very similar figures. Two quieter, more reflective queens from the Tudor court, and I think these kind of more introverted figures are where Alison Weir's historical fiction writing really shines, where she is able to draw out, to bring out rich inner worlds for these quieter figures in the historical record and really give them their moment to shine. Spot number 10 goes to Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, a speculative time travel novel in which a black woman living in the 1970s is unexpectedly dragged back into the antebellum South and being forced to confront the brutal reality of slavery and being confronted with the unexpected truth that one of her ancestors was a cruel slave owner. It's haunting, but it is so powerful. It's actually quite a short novel, but really packs a punch, and it's one of those books that I just think should be on everybody's to-read list. Spot number 9 goes to Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. I resisted reading Anne of Green Gables for such a long time, but my friend Rachel really pushed this on me, and I hate to admit that I was wrong, but yeah, I was wrong. Anne is fantastic. This is now such a comfort read for me. Just Green Gables is just such a comfort fictional place for me. It's just a wonderful story about the power of imagination, compassion, resilience. I love it very much. Spot number 8 goes to A Terrible Kindness by Jo Browning-Grow. This historical fiction just has so many different elements that make a successful novel in my mind. It's historical fiction, as I say. It's about music, it's about singing. It's a book about death. Apparently that is an interest of mine. About complex family dynamics, about our main characters discovering their passions later in life. We have a school setting, we have a real life historical event featured with the Aberfan disaster. I just think this is great and I return to it a lot. Spot number 7 is another book which features a real historic event, and it is The Temple of Fortuna by Elodie Harper. This is the third and final book in the Wolf Den trilogy. The original book saw our main character Amora, who in the first book was an enslaved sex worker living in Pompeii, and her fight for freedom. In the third book we are 5 years on from that original story. Amora's life has changed in a lot of ways, but also, as different as her circumstances are, her position is still tenuous, it's still precarious, as she's still in a lot of danger, just in different ways. And in the midst of this book, while she is coming to terms with a lot of the choices that she made in previous books, Mount Vesuvius erupts. And suddenly it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, enslaved or free, we learn that nature will have its way and is more powerful than any sort of social structure. And I have said before, this book is quite slow in the first half, but as soon as we get to the eruption, it is just the most gripping, enthralling reading. You will not put it down. Spot number 6 goes to Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Another romance book which is just such a comfort read for me. This is definitely my favourite contemporary romance that I've ever read. It is fun, it is silly. You know, we've got this romance between the first son of the United States and a Prince of England. There's a lot of like political, social, historic wrong in this book, but it is also just such good fun that I can overlook a lot of its flaws. Sometimes you just want a book that is a great time, and that's definitely what this book gives me. Spot number 5 goes to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab. Now it's funny because every time that I finish this book, I end up thinking, yeah, I really enjoyed that. It's a great book. It's probably not one of my favourite books though. However, when I came to do this list and I thought about ranking it lower, I just physically couldn't do it. There is just a grip that this book has on me that I can't quite explain, and I can't let it go. There's something about the historical fiction of it all, the Faustian pact with a devilish creature, the dual timeline, the fact that this book takes place over 300 years of history, the discussion on art, on music, on making your mark in the world. Also the fact that the character of Luke exists in this book, and I just find him an attractive character. I don't know what's wrong with me. Spot number 4 goes to The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice from the perspective of Mary. The first quarter to a third of the book is retelling Pride and Prejudice from her perspective, but then the book carries on to quite a few years after the events of Pride and Prejudice and following the death of Mr. Bennet. And we see Mary having to come to terms with her position in the world and being encouraged to come out of her shell when she is always being overlooked and seen as the dull, plain child. This is a book that I read at the beginning of 2020, and honestly, it meant so much to me. As somebody who is a Jane Austen fan, and I love how evocative this is of Jane Austen's writing style, but also just generally as somebody who has always kind of felt like the Mary of my friendship groups, I've always just felt kind of plain and boring and dull in comparison to my much more sparkly friends. And this book just gave Mary her chance to shine, and I really loved it for that. Spot number 3 goes to the final of my dual rankings, and it is When a Scot Ties the Knot / The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. Tessa Dare has very quickly become my favourite historical romance writer because I just find her stories so much fun. You know, they are good fun Regency romps. They give you the Regency world, they give you kind of the steaminess of a bodice ripper, but her leading ladies and her leading men are always just so fun to read about, very intelligent, very feminist, very respectful of each other. They're just kind of comfort reads at this point. I go back to them again and again. Spot number 2, the penultimate one on this list, goes to Matilda, Empress, Queen, Warrior by Catherine Hanley. You knew this book was going to rank highly for me. I recommend it all the time. It was the book that just introduced me to the Anarchy and to Empress Matilda, who is one of my favourite historic figures. Justice for Matilda! And I just love how she tells this history, how she cuts through all of the ways that chroniclers of the time were writing about Matilda in very gendered, very biased ways, in a way that a lot of history writing that I've seen on the Anarchy has never really quite done. She really confronts the sources and interrogates them, rather than just taking everything for gospel, and really asking why it is that chroniclers might have a vested interest in depicting the events of the Anarchy a certain way. Their contradictions, the ways that different figures of this time period do similar actions, but the way that they are presented is different. I love it, it's great. Once again, justice for Matilda. And then the number 1 spot, you probably could have seen this coming, generally goes to the Wolf Hall trilogy, but particularly The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. It's so baffling to think that the first time that I read Wolf Hall, I wasn't a fan of it. I just had very set preconceived notions on Thomas Cromwell, on various figures of the Tudor court, that this really clashed with. But this series is just such a testament to the power of switching perspectives and the importance of doing so in order to make a more well-rounded portrait of any time period in your mind. That by the end of The Mirror and the Light, I found myself crying for Thomas Cromwell, and who would have ever thought that that would be the case? This series has just set such a standard, and probably an unfair standard, for historical fiction in my mind, in terms of the world building that she's able to do, the character descriptions, the way that she's able to build this atmosphere of the Tudor court and the Tudor world, so evidently highly researched, but never doing too much, never just info dumping on the page. It is just such a wonderful, wonderful series, and so I feel really deserves the top spot in the list of my favourite books of the last 5 years. So there we go. Those are all 45 books from my favourites videos from the last 5 years, ranked for your viewing pleasure. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Let me know what your top pick would have been, and any books that you would recommend as a result of this video. I would love to hear from you. And also just a thank you to you all for 5 years on BookTube. Thank you for watching my videos. I hope for 5 more years to come. And yeah, I just generally love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic fantastic, fantastic day and look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.